Okay, so Mikhail Bakunin, he was a Russian anarchist. He was first born in a town that I can't pronounce the name. It starts with a P. It was in May 30 of 1814. And he died July 1st of 1876 in Bern, Switzerland, when he was only 62. This was his early death was attributed to his years spent in Russian prisons, which were horrible and gave him basically really, really bad health. So his early development at 14, he goes to artillery school, and he leaves there, and then he goes to Moscow to study philosophy at the age of 21 against his father's wishes. He was born to a noble family of landowners in Russia, and so he kind of goes basically against what his father's wishes were. While he's studying philosophy in Moscow, he actually starts to get into Hegel and provided some of the first translations of Hegel into Russian. In 1840, he goes to Berlin and then to Dresden a few years later. In Dresden, there was an insurrection uprising in 1849, which he was a big part of. When the Russian government found out that he was becoming extremely radical, what they did is they took away all of his possessions in Russia because he would not come back to Russia to stop his radicalism all over Europe. But in 1844, he goes to Paris, where he's in contact with Pierre-Joseph Proudhon and Karl Marx, and that's where he really starts to develop his revolutionary ideas. Again, he participated in the Dresden Uprising, 1849. Notable people were Richard Wagner, who's a really great classical artist, and then also Wilhelm Heine. I don't really know particularly what he did, but he got captured in Dresden and was sentenced to life imprisonment by the Russian authorities, by the Austro-Hungarian authorities. Basically, everyone hated him. And wanted him killed, but they ended up just giving him life imprisonment in Russia. And this was in 1851. So he goes to prison for 8 years in the famous prison of Peter Paul prison. I don't know. It was famous. He was there for 8 years. He got out because his cousin was a prince. And so his prince appealed to the Tsar of Russia, and also his mother appealed to him to get him out. And so what it did is they allowed him to come out of prison and to work for his cousin in Siberia. In 1861, though, he escapes via Japan and then to the United States, and then he makes his way back to Europe, which is pretty awesome. Ultimately, though, he does move to Italy in 1861. And he immerses himself in any of the revolutions that go on. So he was in the Poland uprising. He was in a line uprising, which is outside of Paris, in 1870. And then in 1871, they had the Paris Commune. In 1868, though, he joins the First International. With Karl Marx and everything else. He was part of a group called the Social Democracy Alliance. And what it was an international group with a bunch of different nationalism from Spain, Italy, Greece, all these different kinds of anarchist groups all together into this one Social Democracy Alliance, which was an international group. The First International rejected them and said that they could not come as a whole group of international because this was an international group too. And so they made them break up into their own nationalistic groups. But he got kicked out of the First International in 1872 by basically Karl Marx, and his supporters got voted out. They were the minority party. And so he starts another international, which was called the Black International in Switzerland in 1872. Nothing really happens or develops after that. Within the Black International. But he ends up retiring in 1873, so a year after he gets kicked out of the International, and he goes to Switzerland and he retires, and he basically says, I don't have enough energy or willpower to fight for the revolution anymore. I'm retiring. And so he retires for 30 years and then he dies. I believe there was already a talk on his life, so that's why I kind of gave a really brief glimpse over it. So I would rather more focus on his ideals and what he talked about. So his biggest advocacy was for anarcho-collectivism. Anarcho-collectivism is different from anarcho-communism in the sense that anarcho-collectivism still believes in a wage system. What will happen is that the means of production will be collectively owned, controlled, and managed by the producers or workers. And so what will happen is each worker will be paid according to what the work that he has done. So before this, the revolution occurs where workers take control of everything and they collectivize everything. But not everything, but they collectivize, what is it called? Not qualitative, but property that, that is used for the means of production. That's what they collectivize. And so not your books, not your individual clothes. Those kind of things are not collectivized. Those are still your own personal property. And that's what they considered only personal property. They didn't consider property houses, those kind of things. So they set up a salary or a wage system, which would be set up by the different democratic councils that were part of the unions and part of the different corporations, and set up these democratic councils from the workers to determine the pay of each worker. And then this wage will be able to be used in a communal market where all of the different products are there. And so you can say, hey, I want to buy an hour's worth of tobacco, or I want to buy, a toothbrush for 15 minutes of my work. So the difference between anarcho-communism is that the goods are distributed according to how much you work and how much you put in versus what your needs are. So that's a brief synthesis of anarcho-collectivism. He also believed in federalism, federalism being more of going from the bottom up. And so a decentralization of groups organized from the bottom up, starting with the individual person, and then they go into associations, and those associations form into communes, and the communes form into regions, and then those regions form into nations. And so everyone has the choice to associate or not, can do it with whomever they please. So on the very initial basis is you have the individual. And so the individual, if he wants to associate with someone, they can make an association, move into a commune. But at any point, if that individual feels like it's not going for him, they can obviously opt out of that. So that was his basis for federalism. He was also very anti-God, anti-religion, extremely. One really good quote is, he says, "The idea of God implies the abdication of human reason and justice as the most decisive negation of human liberty and necessarily ends in the enslavement of mankind in theory and practice." And that was in God and the State in 1882, so after he was died, or after he died. So basically he believed that what God was is that he was just like the state and that he controlled everything, and that especially religion and church, the controlling power of those forces is just the same as the state. And so I believe it's Voltaire, it might be Voltaire. It started with a V.
Voltaire's the anarchist writer.
Okay, so it's Voltaire then. Voltaire said that if God didn't exist, we would have to create him. Bakunin switched it, and he said if God existed, we would have to destroy him. So, it's a bit different. He also advocated for propaganda of the deed, to a letter to a Frenchman on the present crisis in 1870. So this was during the the Lions Uprising in 1870, right before the Paris Commune, which was in March and May of 1871. He says, we must spread our principles not with words but with deeds, for this is the most popular, the most potent, and the most irresistible form of propaganda. So he gave rise to insurrectionary anarchism, which is basically, some would say terrorism, some would say very individualist, in that it's one person committing either an assassin or one person exploding a bomb, not a specific set group.